delegates who are part of this program today. My name is Dr. Biju Raghavan. I'm a pain and palliative medicine specialist. I'm a senior consultant and head of the Department of Pain and Palliative Medicine at Rajagiri Hospital, which is in Cochin, which is in the middle part of Kerala. And I've been in this field since 2003. That would be around now 17 years. And I've been associating with Pallium India, who is conducting this program since the time Pallium India was formed. So it's quite a privilege to be associated with Pallium India. They're doing excellent work. So if we can start the program, uh, we I don't know if you could share the screen from your end. Today, we are going to talk about some basics on communication skills. We are doing this as a two-part program. The first part today, and the second part will be sometime later. You will be notified when the second part will be. So, in first part, we'll be talking about basics. In second part, we'll be talking about communicating bad news, collusion management, anger management, etc. So today we are only going to discuss something basics. So can we have the next slide, please? So today we will be will be covering what is the importance and what is the role of communication in our healthcare system. We will talk a little bit about some barriers to communication, not all the barriers, just we'll touch upon some of them. We'll also discuss a little bit of the do's and don'ts in communication, and we'll talk about how to take a history. I'm sure as young students, you would have taken, you would have been taught how to take a history of the patient. You would have done case presentations to your teachers, and subsequently, you would have in your day-to-day practice been talking to your patients. It is something similar like that, but we will be talking about how to take a history in a little bit more elaborate. Next slide, please. So, why is communication challenging in the healthcare? For the simple reason that people come to us not because they are happy to come to us, but because they are sick, they are in pain, they are in distress, and that is the reason why people come to hospitals and you know otherwise they would go to cinema theaters and hotels to have a good food and resorts, and they will travel to good destination. People don't come to hospital for any of that. They come because they are sick, they are not well, they are suffering. So the starting point itself is a negative, and that is why it is more challenging in uh, our area, or which is healthcare. And also, uh, whether we are doing a satisfactory job, whether we are doing good care, whether we are providing good care, it is not dependent on what we have in our hospitals. We may have very big hospitals with lots of equipments and but none of that has an impact. Ultimately, what matters is how the patient and the family felt. What was their experience when they were with us? And as a result, that is the challenge because we have to satisfy the patient and families for them to appreciate what we are doing. And it is not easy. Next slide, please. So this is an old study. It came in 1986 in the Journal of Headache, a neurology journal. What they found that the best predictor for resolution of headache turned out to be the patient's perception. that they had an opportunity to tell their problem, their story, and discuss their concerns about the headache fully with their physician during the first visit. So, this emphasizes the importance of communication, the ability to make patients feel that they have been listened to. Remember, it is not just about spending time, it is about how the time is spent. What are the techniques we are using which makes them feel satisfied? You can sit with a person for 1 hour and still the person may be unsatisfied. But if we are using the right kind of technique, we can spend about 5 to 10 minutes, and that may itself be enough to give satisfaction. It's all about how we are using the time, not how much time we are using. Next slide, please. A lot of medical errors can be prevented with proper communication. Look alike drugs, sound alike drugs, all of these things. As nurses, you may be very familiar with those terms. A lot of medical errors is a result of poor communication. Next slide, please. There is also a financial outcome of inefficient communication. This study came out in 2010. This study was done in US, where they found that on an average, a hospital will lose about $12.3 billion, and they traced it to poor communication. So there is a financial implication also. So all of this, why I'm trying to emphasize with these, what I'm trying to emphasize with these slides is that communication skills is very important. We have to learn communication skills not for the patient or their families. We have to learn communication skills for our own selfish interest. It is beneficial to us to learn communication skills. Next slide, please. Now, problem is when we are becoming young doctors and nurses, we are tested on our knowledge, we are tested on our skills, we are tested on our bedside skills, everything we are tested upon. But what we are not tested is our communication skills ability. Why it is not tested? Because it is not part of our regular curriculum. We do not have structured communication training program in our undergraduate study or postgraduate study or anything beyond it. And because it is not there, it is not tested. But when we come into the real world as doctors and nurses, we have to deal with patients and families. And many a times, the biggest deficit on our part is not our medical knowledge or our nursing skills. It is our inability to communicate properly. Next slide, please. I just mentioned it as a doctor-nurse relationship, but it was also applicable to nurse-patient relationship, because after all, we are part of the same. We are just professionals of the same system. So it's a multi-pronged approach whereby good communication has better outcome in diagnosis, in treatment compliance, and as a result, better outcome leading to better patient and family satisfaction. And when you have a happy family, a happy patient and family, you have a happy healthcare team, because then the stress comes down. And then it also has an implication on patient safety as well as less chance of litigation. No? And in our Indian context, less chance of violence against healthcare professionals. So it is very important that good communication skills is incorporated in our education and in our day-to-day practice, because it has beneficial effects at multiple levels. Next slide, please. So the question is, why should we learn medical communication skills? The answer is, next slide, for our own selfish interest, because it gives us a lot of benefit. Benefit in the terms of the patient understanding why a treatment is being suggested, and as a result, they will comply with it. If they don't understand, they will not comply with it. Many times we think we are giving them proper instructions, but those instructions is something that they will be sitting in front of you and shaking their head as if they understood everything. But then if you ask later, you will realize they didn't understand anything. The problem is not theirs, the problem is ours, because we have not been able to send, get the message across in a language that they understand. So if they don't understand, naturally their compliance with the management will not be adequate. And if the compliance is not adequate, then the outcome of the management will also be unsatisfactory. So good communication leads to better compliance, better management, better outcome, and this will have positive impact on the patient relationship with us. So good relationship means less stress for us and improvement in our professional achievement. So it is a win-win situation for us. That is why it is important to learn communication skills. Next slide. Of course, it is going to be beneficial to the patient and family because it reduces their uncertainty. They will know what to do, where to go, how much it's going to cost, so they can plan um, according to the information that they have received. So if they understand it well, then a lot of their anxiety comes down. They can plan for whatever treatment is required. So it is beneficial to the patient and family. Next slide. Not only patient and family, there are a lot of misconceptions about what healthcare can achieve in the society. So it's very important that we remove the misconceptions in society. A lot of stigma, unnecessary stigma. For example, a simple example is there's a lot of stigma about cancer, and as a result, people will not go to the doctor and get themselves properly examined. And many a times, what happens is that by the time the disease is diagnosed, it is already too late. So the stigma and the fear associated with some diseases or some situations is unnecessary. It is only because of inadequate communication. If we are properly communicating, then people will understand. The society will be better informed, and this in turn will have a positive impact on us because right now there is a lot of stress between medical community and the general population at large. People don't trust us. People uh, do violence on us. So all of that, it shows that the relationship is not good. So for a harmonious relationship, a good communication skill is helpful. Next slide, please. Next slide. So some of the barriers that we can think of is, can we have the bullets one, two, three, four? Yeah. So so there's one more bullet. Yeah. So a lot of miscellaneous barriers are there. We are busy people. Sometimes we don't know whether we'll be able to find time for it. So many a times when I'm taking class on communication, the most common thing that people tell me is that they don't have time. So the answer to that is good communication skills should save you on time, energy, and effort. It should save time. It should save energy. It should save effort. That is the whole purpose of learning communication skills. If learning communication skills is burdening you with more time, then what's the point? So please understand, good communication skills will actually benefit you. It will save you time. If you have been spending half an hour explaining something to the patient, with better communication skills, you may be able to make the person understand in 10 minutes or 15 minutes instead of half an hour. So that is the advantage of good communication skills. A lot of other issues are there, but please understand that there many of these barriers can be overcome. For example, if there's lack of privacy, we don't need absolute privacy. We can just have an illusion of privacy. to have a better environment. Technology, nowadays we are using technology a lot. Earlier we would be having this class face to face in a classroom. Nowadays we are all sitting in our places from all over the country, and now we are having this class together. This is enabled by technology. But remember, not everybody may have access to technology, and even if you have access to technology, not everybody may be tech savvy. Not everybody may be able to use technology, right? So all of this can be barrier to communication. Next slide. Sometimes the patient and the family itself can be a barrier to communication. Sometimes the patient may be very timid, and they may be coming from perhaps a disadvantaged background. So when they come to the hospital, and they may feel intimidated, they may not be confident enough to tell all their problems to us, because probably they think that we are busy, or they may be scared to tell all the problems, and as a result it becomes a barrier to communication. Sometimes the family members are overpowering, and they are trying to be protective. So if you ask a question to the patient, instead of the patient, the family member will reply, right? So you never get a chance for the patient never gets a chance to say whatever he or she wanted, because the family member is always replying for the patient. So that also becomes a barrier. There are some diseases which can affect communication. If somebody can't hear, then that becomes a barrier to communication. If somebody had a stroke and has got dysarthria or aphasia, all of those things can become barrier to communication. Next slide, please. Can we be barriers? Let us find out. Next slide. So now in times of Corona, we are all putting up a mask. So our facial expressions are kind of hidden behind the mask. So that becomes the barrier. Even in other times when we put on our uniform, we put on a strap around our neck, all of this can intimidate a patient and the family members. So they may not be able to freely talk to us when we are in our uniform, and all this, all the paraphernalia which tells us that this is a medical professional, it's a doctor or a nurse. In So they may not be able to freely talk. I'm not talking about everybody. Some of the patients may not be able to freely talk to us, but that doesn't mean we should not wear uniform. We have to, but we have to make them more comfortable by our body language, by our behavior. Next slide. Next. Yeah, can you go? Yeah, a lot many times our attitude also becomes a problem. We may think that communication is not important. I don't have time for it. Maybe we are not interested in. So all of that thing can become barriers to communication. It is up to us whether we want to learn or not. If we have an attitude that we don't want to learn it, then nobody can help. If you have an attitude that you want to learn, then only uh, you can be helped. Next slide, please. This I have already touched upon. We don't have structured training in communication skills in our curriculum. So the lack of training is a problem. So now I think the government has started a program on ethics and things like that. Again, the problem is that well-structured training program in communication skills is still not part of it. The some part of it is being taken care of. Another problem is we don't have enough teachers to train communication skills. There are in other industry, in IT, IT-enabled services, business, MBAs, and all. There are a lot of this non-healthcare sectors where communication skills is taught, soft skills are taught in a very structured way. But in healthcare industry, doctors and nurses don't have access to communication skills training program. Very few people are there doing this work. I am also not a full-time communication skills trainer. I am a doctor, and I do this out of my passion. I do this because I want to, whatever little I know, I'm trying to give it to doctors and nurses so that hopefully some they will benefit from what I learned. Next slide, please. So coming to some of the do's and don'ts, let us look at that. The most important thing is you have to make an eye contact. So whenever somebody approaches you, you may be a nurse sitting in the nursing station, and somebody comes and say something. Just look up and make eye contact with that person. Right? So, sometimes we may be busy with something. We may be sometimes we may be very busy, but that doesn't mean we don't look up and make an eye contact with the person who has come to talk to us. And even if we are wearing a mask, it is important to smile, because even if your smile cannot be seen, it will be seen in your eyes. Your eyes will reflect the smile, and it will be heard in your voice. So when you're smiling, it will be heard in your voice, it will be seen in your eyes. So it is very important that you smile even if you're wearing a mask, right? It creates a better body language. Next slide. Do not categorize people. Do not say, oh, that is a very itchy patient, or that's a very VIP patient, beware. So all of this creates some kind of negative image in our mind, and as a result, our interaction will with them will become negative. So do not when you put a label on somebody, it's a difficult patient, it's a bad patient, it is not the family members are not good. So whenever we have this kind of labeling of people, it will have a psychological impact on us. We will kind of start judging them, and this will have a negative impact on our interaction. Be non-judgmental. People can be of different, even among us doctors and nurses, we are not all similar. We are all different kinds of people, right? So somebody has some kind of attitude, somebody has another kind of attitude, somebody has one kind of behavior, another has another kind of behavior. So all of us are very unique. So it doesn't matter who we are, doesn't matter who our patients are, doesn't matter who their family members are. We have to be non-judgmental, accept people as they are, and most importantly, respect people for what they are. We don't respect only the rich and the famous people. Respect everybody, the poor, the sick, and the last and the least. It's important to be respectful to everybody. Everybody deserves to be respected. Next slide, please. Do not ask leading questions. Don't say, oh, you're feeling better, isn't it? Sometimes people may not be able to say, no, I'm not feeling better. But if you ask in a leading way, they may say, yes, I am better, but they may not be actually better. They may not be able to counteract you. It's always good to ask an open-ended question. How are you today? Instead of you're getting better, isn't it? You're feeling better, isn't it? Your pain is better, isn't it? So don't ask leading questions. Just ask, how are you today? Next slide. Do not minimize a patient's problem. Don't say, oh, this is nothing. Don't worry, this is nothing. For each person, their problem is the biggest problem. So when you minimize somebody's problem, you only cause dissatisfaction. Do not compare your patient's problem with another patient's problem. Because when you compare, you are trying to tell that, see, there's another person who's got bigger problems than you. So never compare, never minimize, never compare. Instead of that, you acknowledge their emotion. You acknowledge their emotion and say that how you feel is normal for this kind of situation. So you normalize their emotional experience. You accept their emotional experience, and you normalize their emotional experience. You do not normalize the situation. You normalize their emotional experience of the situation by saying that whoever would have, in this position, they would feel the same thing, right? So this is one way of saying that what you are experiencing is absolutely okay. Next slide. Do not give false hope. Sometimes when people are very miserable and in very poor conditions, sometimes there's a tendency on our part to pat them on the back and say, don't worry, everything will be all right. We are there, everything will be all right. That kind of thing. And that really does not help. We may feel satisfied, we said some nice words, but as far as the person is concerned, it does not benefit them at all. It's very important to listen to your problems. If you have some solution, offer it, and always give realistic hope. Right? Look for what is possible realistically and give that kind of hope. Never give false hopes. Next slide, please. Do not assume. When somebody says, I'm so scared, I'm so worried, when people say things like that, we may assume that this is the reason that they're worried about. So do not assume, just ask them, why did you say that? And then they will tell you. And when they tell you, you may be surprised that what you thought was not at all the reason that the person said those words. Right? It may be totally different. So it is very important to ask, do not assume. Always ask, and then you will find out because the person will tell you what the problem is. Always ask. Next slide, please. And of course, don't forget the human touch. I know that during Corona times, it is very difficult. We are all wearing PPE kits and gloves and mask and shield and everything. But even if those things are there, it is important. It is possible to make a human connection. In the early days, in April, May of 2020, even I was not touching people. I was very scared, but over a period of time, I realized, you had to protect yourself, wear all the gloves and PPE kits and everything, but protect yourself at the same time. Reach out to the patient and families, touch them, you know, touch them, and restore the human touch. Along with it, of course, you have to take care of yourself. You have to make sure that you're physically, mentally, and spiritually in good condition. Physically, you do some exercise, do something, move your body little bit every day. Not as part of work, you find out some time specifically to exercise 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever you can find. Do some, find out some time where you can do some exercise. Do whatever you want. You can jog, you can walk, you can dance, whatever. But move your body as part of exercise. And meditation is essentially exercise for the brain. You find out sometime 10 minutes, 15 minutes every day to sit somewhere and meditate on something. So that also helps strengthen your mind. Indulge in some hobbies, anything. It's you cannot have a life just with work at home and work at place. Find out something, just a plant a, you know a small, uh, grow a plant, or have a pet. Do something, uh, something that is different from your professional work and home work. And stay connected. Uh, Stay connected means you can stay connected with friends and relatives over phone, or you can read a book and get connected with the what the author was saying, or you can think of getting connected with the divine, whatever it may be. Whatever, stay connected. It is very important to stay connected. Next slide. So coming to the last part of this, how to take a history. We know most of it, but I'm just going to add some few things which I hope will illustrate the point that how we can make the patient experience of interacting with us more satisfactory. So, if you're a nurse, it's possible that you are doing some kind of a patient assessment in the OP area before they go see the doctor, or if you're a nurse in the ICU, you may be having a much more deeper interaction with the patient. If you're a nurse in the ward, you may be seeing the patient regularly. as part of your routine practice. You may be going to their room and interacting with them. So, whatever area you are working in, when you're meeting for the patient for the first time, always give a greeting. The greeting consists of three parts. One is you make an eye contact, plus then you give a smile. Along with the smile, you can nod your head, and then you say something, whatever is culturally appropriate, whatever sounds normal and natural. You say that as part of it. Don't do something extraordinary. Do only what is normal and natural. So smile, so make eye contact, smile, nod your head, and say something. After that, get comfortable. So if you are a nurse and you're going to see the patient to take vitals, I suggest you sit by the patient's bedside. You pull up a chair or a stool, sit by the patient's bedside, and in the sitting position, take the BP, pulse, or temperature, etc. I'm sure you can do all of that in the sitting position. The advantage is when you sit down with the patient, it gives more satisfaction because this body position is a very good body language. When you position your body equal to the patient is sitting or lying on the bed, you are also sitting. So this part is really going to be satisfactory to the patient and family. Most of us are not trained to do that, and many a times in our training, we are falsely told not to sit by the bedside. Right? There is no book on bedside manners which tells you you should not sit. In fact, most all of them say you should sit by the bedside of the patient. It gives more satisfaction to the patient. It does not in any way uh, impede your work. Only if you're providing patient care in terms of sponging or sponge bath or turning over the patient or changing the bed sheet and things like that, you can't do it by sitting. But taking vitals, you can take sitting. And even if otherwise, if you are just gone to the patient's room to talk to them, what if even if you're spending that 1 minute, sit down and spend that 1 minute instead of standing and spending that 1 minute. Because when you sit down, it gives more satisfaction. Whatever your purpose of the visit, the starting should be an open-ended question. How are you today? Or how are you? Whatever. It should be an open-ended question. You may be going there to take the BP, but just ask, how are you today? Along with it, I would also suggest you ask the family members also. Our focus is always the patient. Please remember the family is also suffering. So ask the family member, how are they? Are they taking food on time? Are they able to sleep? So it's important to show them that you care, not just for the patient, but also for the family. All of this will really improve the relationship. They will feel very satisfied. And if they're saying something, do not interrupt. Let them finish what they say. So that means listen to them. Next slide. And while they're talking, it is important to encourage them to talk. And for that, you have to continue making the eye contact. Don't get distracted. Don't look at the watch or look at your case sheet, or don't start making notes while they are talking to you. Keep the eye contact and nod your head from time to time in encouragement. You can also make some sounds like mm-hmm, mm-hmm, okay. So this kind of sounds also will encourage people to uh, talk whatever they want. In case you didn't understand something, clarify then and there. Don't wait for it. Don't keep it for later, because sometimes the conversation may go some other place, and it's possible that you may forget. So it is very important to clarify something if you didn't understand what they were saying. It's also good to understand what do they understand about what is going on. Many times we tell them a lot of things. Some of the things they understand, many of the things they don't understand. And the doctors will come and tell them and give them some instruction. But as a nurse, it is usually you who are spending more time with them. It's a good idea for you to find out what did they understand. The doctors came and told them, gave them some instructions, gave them some information. You understood what was it all about, but did they understand? So it's possible that when you talk to them and ask them what did they understand about what the doctor said, it's possible that they may say that I didn't understand anything, or they may say some things which will give you the information that they understood little bit, they didn't understand some of it, and lot of things they assumed, and that the assumption was not right. So they, when you talk to them, you will understand that what is the level of understanding, and this you can convey to the doctors that I talked to this person. This is what you had told them, but this is what they have understood. It's possible that they didn't understand properly. Maybe you could come and explain it properly, or you could explain it things once more so that they may be able to understand it better. In that sense, you will be able to supplement the counseling that the doctors would have done perhaps in a better way, in a language that they understand. Okay. So apart from that, it is also important to understand what their concerns are. What are their anxieties? What are their fears? What are their concerns? It's very important to understand that part. And once you know what their worries are, either if there is something to be conveyed to the treating doctor, you can convey this is what they worried about. It's also possible that sometimes there are no solution to it. So it's important to listen to them, because when you listen to them, they're able to ventilate their emotional stress, and that is a kind of a therapy, right? So it is never a waste of time you allowing them to talk and ventilate their emotions. Next slide, please. If there is any information to be shared, share them honestly. Do not lie to people. If you can't be honest, then perhaps you don't say anything much, but at least don't lie to people. You can many times the concerned doctors will come and explain to them and what are the treatment options and all, and subsequently when you are talking to the patient family later on, after the rounds and so on, uh, it is possible that they may have not understood, so you can tell them what exactly the doctor meant, and then you can also discuss with them, and you can understand what their concerns are. For example, if surgery is advised, but the patient doesn't have money, or there's nobody to come and stay with the patient for so long after surgery, there could be so many things. So it is important that you talk to them, understand what those concerns are, and maybe in consultation with your treating doctor, because it will be a big help for the doctors or the nurses are talking to the patient and finding out more information so that this can be conveyed. Right? So treatment options can then be discussed and then can be conveyed to the patient and family. It's very important that we listen to their beliefs and their fears and problems, because every individual is different. Everybody has different kind of beliefs. So it is important that sometimes there are some beliefs which prevents some kind of treatment. For example, there are some people who believe, for example, the Jehovah Witness, they are against blood transfusion. They're not against surgery, but they're against blood transfusion, right? So there are different kinds of beliefs in our country. It's important to understand and work out a plan which becomes acceptable. So once a decision is taken by everybody, it is acceptable to everybody. That is called decision by consensus. And then maybe we can summarize it. Now, it's not necessary that we have this communication, this our interview exactly in this pattern. This is general trends that I'm talking about. You can have some of this in between your communication. You can use some of these trends. Next slide, please. So you can confirm whether they are agreeable to this treatment plan, and you can just talk to them and close the interview. Uh, in while closing, it's good to ask: do they have any more questions? Do they have any more concerns? Even if you have discussed everything, the last thing from your side should always be: do you have any more questions? So, in case they had forgotten something, it gives them a chance to use this opportunity to talk about it. Close the interview by leaving the door open means you give them a contact number. If you don't want to give your personal number, do not give them your personal number. You give them some contact number, some department number, or hospital number on which they can call and ask for any kind of support that they want. At the end of the day, when you are leaving, you can always greet them, you can make an eye contact, smile, and say what is culturally appropriated in the form of goodbye, good day, namaste, etc. But the greeting is something that you start in the beginning and finish in the end. The beginning part is greeting, end part is also greeting. Next slide. So the important thing that I want to convey is that medical communication is a learned skill. Just like how you learn to take BP or how you learn to put in an IV cannula. You somebody taught you. So somebody taught you how to take a BP, you practiced it, and now you have become an expert. Similarly, communication skills is a learned skill. Somebody teaches you, you practice, and you become an expert. It's as simple as that. Next slide. So we have come to today's session end. Next session, which is part 2, we will be talking about communicating bad news, managing pollution, and dealing with an angry person. So I think, Arun, we will stop here, and I'll take any questions if anybody has any. If you want to ask a question, you can put in the chat box, or if you want to ask a question directly, you can ask as a video chat. If there are no questions, then perhaps, Arun, you could consider the case discussion, the case presentation.
Yes, so we can wait for a few seconds if any questions. Participants have any questions, please. You can chat or please unmute yourself and start speaking. Sir, one question, sir. Sir, you told you that take visits sitting with the patient, but here doctor is not allowing.
Yeah, so perhaps the doctor has not attended any session on communication skills. So the problem is if people above you who are the decision makers are also not aware of the communication skills, then you have no choice. The only thing is you can suggest the management uh, to train everybody in communication skills.
Any more questions? Right.
Probably it will be a good idea to you know start the case presentation, and in
Yes.
case anybody has any questions, they can always put it in the chat box, and maybe we can also have any questions at the end of the case discussion. So no harm finishing early if that is possible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can go to the case presentation. Actually, today's case presentation by Sister Anglian MP is from Arunachal Pradesh. He already informed me that she is having some network issue. And then, sister, are you there? Uh, Sister Anglian MP? Sister, can you hear me? I think, sir, she is having some network issue. Otherwise, I can present the case presentation. And, sir, we can move for the discussion afterwards. Sir, is it
Yes,
okay,
please.
sir?
Yes,
Okay.
please. Yes, please. And if the person who was supposed to present comes in between, you can always hand it over to her.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think she already contacted me and she told that she's had some network issues. She's from Arunachal Pradesh. I don't know what happened to her. Anyway, she's in our meeting. She's here.
All right.
Okay, sir. And today's case presentation by Sister Nagla MP. She's an nursing officer, TRIHMS, Arunachal Pradesh. And about the patient details, patient is 48 years old male and diagnosed with the cancer of colon. And present complaints: on and off fever, patient abdomen with vomiting, loose stool, and history of illness. Patient is suffering from cancer of colon since 2018. In the year 2018, patient suffered from on and off fever, pain in abdomen with vomiting, loose stool for 5 to 6 days, and then constipation for 5 to 6 days, lack of appetite and weight loss. On examination, patient's BP is 110 by 80 mm of Hg, temperature is 98.6 Fahrenheit, pulse rate is 1, 112 beat per minute, and respiration is 30 breaths per minute, and SpO2 is 96% on room air, and general patient look weak and dull and agitated mood, extension of abdomen with the tenderness. Then treatment and significant investigation, and chemotherapy and constipation for constipation, and for oncosurgery. I think the patient is consulted with the doctor. Then psychological aspects. Psychological aspect: patient is less expensive. I think he's poor. He doesn't want to take about his condition and doesn't let his family member talk to. He gets angry every time if anything related to his health asked. He only nods and listen to his doctor, and most of the complaint is conveyed by his wife. Medications: injection Cefogen S 1.5 gram IVBD and Geplan 40 mg IVBD and Rucopman 1 ampule IVBD and injection paracetamol 100 ml IV SOS. Main concern: weight patient doesn't want to take anything related to his health condition. And the summary: a 38-year-old man with the cancer of colon lives with his wife and two sons. He is D2 chemotherapy has started and he doesn't want to take and doesn't allow his family to take about his condition. And discussion points: how can I help my patient so that he can communicate? Thank you. But there is only one discussion point, that is this.
So would anybody like to comment on this? What is their impression? Why is this person getting angry? Why is he not willing to communicate about his health condition? I understand he talks to his doctor, but apart from that, he is not willing to. Uh, he only nods and listens to his doctor, and most of the complaint is conveyed by his wife. So he doesn't want to talk about his condition, doesn't let his family member talk to, but he allows his wife to talk to the doctor. He gets angry every time if anything related to his health is asked. So I assume that he doesn't get angry with the doctor. He perhaps maybe not conveying much. He nods and listens because the wife is the one who is conveying the problems. Okay, so does anybody have any suggestions or any points on why this person is behaving the way it is? Okay, maybe he doesn't want to share about his problem with anybody. But why? Why doesn't he want to share? It's obvious the person doesn't want to share, but the question is why? He seems to be in denial phase as he is very young. Now, age has got nothing to do with denial. You can have denial in whichever age you are, and you can also have acceptance in any age. It's not that the young cannot come to terms with their problem. It's not necessary that the elderly are able to come to terms. So age is not a factor, but is he in denial? So basically, what is denial then? Does anybody want to take that? From what my experience is that those who are in denial, it's not that they stop talking. They talk, but problem is that you tell them what the problem is, and that is something that they are not able to understand or accept. But it doesn't stop them from talking. We can have extensive discussions with people who are in denial.
Sir, one more comment from Sister Josen Shiva. Maybe he doesn't want to get sympathy.
Maybe he doesn't want to.
Get sympathy.
Okay, right. So it is about. So what is the? Why don't people like uh, other people sympathizing with them?
Sir, one more comment from Sister Shelby.
Okay.
If it is not his personality, there could be something that is holding him back. Maybe we
Hmm.
need to have an open conversation with him to see what is holding him back from having conversation.
Okay. So before we go into that, the person's personality, this thing about sympathy, this is something universal. Nobody likes somebody to come and sympathize with them. The problem with sympathy is that it creates a, a difference between the person who is sympathizing and the person who is being given sympathy. It creates a difference in the power equation. What that means is when you sympathize with somebody, it is like, oh, the poor fellow, is in such a sad situation. So the person who is sympathizing automatically becomes in a higher position, and that means you put the person to whom the sympathy is being given in the lower position. So this division of position is what really upsets people. That is why nobody wants to be in the position where they are receiving sympathy. People hate receiving sympathy. Some people may aggressively retaliate against those who are saying sympathetic words to them. Some people may not retaliate, but they may not communicate. They may hold back. They will not respond. Some people, they will be just taking it. They may not like it, but they will kind of tolerate it. But by and large, nobody likes to be sympathized. Just imagine to yourself, if you are having an unfortunate situation and somebody comes and says, "Oh, sorry, this is such a sad situation. You are in such a sad condition. I feel very sorry for you." You know, that kind of word sometimes irritates many people. That is why I am using that thing about sympathy. Denial, on the other hand, is a defense mechanism. When you are experiencing a lot of psychological trauma, you go into denial. Oh, this is not happening to me. This is not true. This just cannot be true. So that kind of denial is trying to protect and preserve your sanity. It is a defense mechanism, a kind of a protection for your mind. And as long as it is not interfering with a treatment plan, it is okay. It is okay to allow denial. And most of the time, denials are not going to interfere in any treatment. So, denial is a defense mechanism. Sympathy is something that most people hate. They just don't like sympathy. The opposite of, or the better option is empathy. Empathy means when you feel for somebody, you try to understand how the person must be feeling and you behave accordingly, not saying, "Oh, you're such a pitiable condition, I feel sorry for you." That is sympathy. Instead of that, saying, "I can't imagine what you must be going through." That would be an empathetic state. However, we have not yet come to the part why he is not communicating, why he probably is he angry, is he feeling helpless, and is trying to cover his anger and helplessness by not saying anything, by actively denying communication. What do you think? Probably, I mean, he is a male, the gender male, when feeling helpless, feels very vulnerable. And one way of covering that vulnerability is by minimizing communication. It is possible that his wife is overpowering the communication space because it is written that he doesn't say much, his wife conveys everything. So, was any effort taken to specifically have a conversation with the patient by making sure that the wife is out of the equation, out of the room, perhaps? So, we don't know the answer to most of the questions I have raised because only the person who was dealing with this patient would be able to answer those questions. Unfortunately, today in our session, we are unable to uh, ask this to the person who had dealt with the patient. I don't, if, correct me if I'm wrong. We are still not able to have a contact with the
Yes, sir. Yes,
presenter.
sir. Yes, sir.
Right. So,
Sister, are 1 minute. Sister, are you there, sir? Sister, are you here? Sister Nagila Ambi?
Hello, sir.
She's here, sir.
Yeah.
so could,
Sir,
so
I'm here,
could
but
you,
I can't connect you. Like my network is not so good that it goes back again.
yeah, your voice is breaking already. So, so for the delegates who are here, the what you have to consider, when somebody is not communicating, then the question is why the person is not communicating. Is the person fearful? Is the person feeling vulnerable? Is the family member's presence so overpowering that the person, because every time you go to talk, it's the family member who is answering, then the person never gets a chance to speak for himself or herself. So, what among all of this situation, what exactly is going on? And then what kind of effort we have taken to reach out to this person? Have we tried to have a communication with this person one on one in private without others being around? Did he open up at that point of time? What have we done to make this person feel less vulnerable? So that means earning the trust of the person, and that means having trying to do relationship building exercises with this person, breaking the ice with this person. So all of these things are needed for somebody who seems to be locked up, not willing to communicate. I will be happy to hear comments from the delegates on the topics or on the points we just talked about.
Biju sir?
Yes.
No, sir. One more comment is there, but it is
Uh-huh.
not now. I think it's from Lavli ma'am.
Uh-huh.
Maybe nobody has taken time and effort to come up his level of expectation and started the conversation.
Okay. That's what I mean. We are handicapped by the fact that the person who was dealing with the patient, we are unable to have access to this person. We could ask all of these questions to the presenter, but we are not able to, whether somebody took time and effort to, have a conversation with this person. And if yes, what was the reaction? All those things we could have asked, but today it does not seem to be possible. We can only speculate. We can only ask these kind of questions.
Sir, one more comment from Sister Shelby. I believe no effort to communicate with the patient has worked out. It is okay to accept that the patient doesn't want to communicate.
Uh, by and large, I can uh, accept with that if you know effort has been taken. Uh, my take on that is everybody has the right to not communicate. So we can't force people to communicate. We can only make an effort. And if we make an effort and the person does not want to communicate, yeah, it is their choice. And we are not talking about psychiatric illness, which is causing this kind of problem. We are talking about normal, regular people without any psychiatric illness who does not want to communicate. We are talking about that. So it's possible, yeah. Mm, It's okay. It is their choice if they don't want to communicate, and they may have reasons, uh, perhaps which we don't know. But I think if we are able to develop a relationship of trust, then it is very rare that people don't open up. People will open up. It's just a matter of time. When they feel less vulnerable, when they feel not threatened, when they feel comfortable enough to open up. And remember, communication is not just what the words you say. He can communicate a few things by gestures also. It is very rare where somebody does not communicate with anybody. It's just a matter of winning the trust of the patient, and usually they will open up. That is normal, but exceptional cases might be there. And if we are dealing with an exceptional person who just doesn't want to communicate with anybody, and you have made the maximum possible effort from your end, I guess we should leave it at that.
Sir, two more comments from the participant. Maybe he is not willing to share with anybody, and maybe he has no trust with anyone.
Right. So as healthcare providers, it is our job to earn the trust of our patients and their families. And that is what this whole communication skills is all about. We have to learn to earn the trust of our patients and families so that they will feel comfortable sharing their intimate secrets with us. We have to be their friend, their guide, and their philosophers, not just medical, uh, just we're not here just to give our technical expertise to the patient and families. We have to be taught, we have to be trained to be their friend and guide. But as I said, unfortunately, that kind of training is never part of our medical or nursing education. We're just made to learn a lot of data, anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and made to learn a lot of skills. But these human skills are not part of our regular training program, unfortunately. But things will improve. Things are improving. It will get better. That's why there was this comment that somebody said that their doctors do not allow the nurses to sit by the bedside. That is some kind of old school thought. So people who are just not knowledgeable enough, they would put up barriers to good communication like that. Okay, any more questions? If not, probably we can wind up the show today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. If anybody having any questions, I think, sir, no more questions.
All right, that's great. So we'll stop for today, and my best wishes to all the delegates who joined in. And thank you, Arun, for conducting this session today very smoothly.
Yes, sir.
Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye,
Okay.
Arun.
Okay, thank you, Biju sir, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
And-
sir.
Okay, bye.
Okay, anyway, I'm sharing the feedback. The feedback link is in the chat. Please do it now. It's a request. And next week we have sessions on the same topic, communication, part 2. Okay, thank you, everyone. We are winding up. Stay safe. Goodbye.